I now use a mirrorless camera, which is great. It's a great camera, ideal for my needs. But one problem it does suffer from, certainly far more than the DSLRs that I used to use, is dust on the sensor. And this is essentially because with a DSLR, the sensor is protected by the shutter blades, which only open if you switch to live view or when you actually come take the shot. With the mirrorless camera, you're effectively running in live view all the time, so the sensor has far less protection. Dust is seen in pictures as a sort of diffuse, opaque disk, particularly in areas of even tone, such as sky. You tend to see it less in more textural areas, rock, grass, that kind of thing. And you also see dust far more often when you shoot with a small aperture. And this is purely because depth of field not only sharpens up details in your picture, it also sharpens up any sort of dust on the sensor too. So if you're shooting wide open typically, for portraiture for instance, you'd probably never notice the dust being a big problem. But sadly, landscape photography, you do tend to shoot with small apertures, so invariably dealing with dust later is one of those tasks that has to be performed in post-production. Now you can mitigate or reduce the amount of dust in your shots before you go out on a shoot by cleaning the sensor. However, if like me you do a lot of lens swapping, invariably the lens changing does mean that the sensor gets exposed to the outside world, and dust will gradually build up over the course of the session. This shot here was one of the last I did on this particular day. It was sunset, and by this point there was lots of dust on the sensor itself, even though I'd cleaned the sensor that morning before I went out. Fortunately, Lightroom has a very simple tool, the spot removal tool, which helps you remove dust in shots quite easily. And it's also one of those tools that you can save. You can save the settings and then apply those settings to other images from the same session. Obviously, dust is a random event, so you wouldn't want to apply it to a shot taken in a different session because you might clone out the wrong area. But if you're shooting over a period, it's a very quick way of applying dust removal to lots of different images very simply. So first you'd go to the Develop module, select the Spot Removal tool, found just under the histogram. The first thing I like to do is to switch on Visualize Spots down here, and you can see instantly that there are lots and lots of spots in this image. You can change the strength of the visualization, but I just tend to leave it on full. Generally the worst spots, the most visible spots, have a heavier outline. The less visible spots have a much softer outline. The next task is to change the size of the brush. Generally you want it to be about the size or just slightly larger than the dust spots themselves. So you can either use the slider here or use the square bracket on the keyboard to adjust the size. So yeah, just slightly larger. You can change the feathering, so this changes how diffuse the outline of the brush tool is, and I generally leave it on a sort of a mid feather, so it's slightly soft, doesn't have a hard edge. You can change the opacity, but again I would tend to leave it on 100%. If you lower the opacity, it does sort of soften how the spot is removed, so it might leave some of the spot behind just slightly more transparent. You can also change between clone and heal. With clone, it will actually paste an area from a part of the picture over the spot. So if you're cloning from a sky, for instance, that's relatively straightforward. It'll just clone one area of the sky to the next. But I tend to use the heal option, which allows Lightroom to analyze how to remove the dust spot, and generally it does a very, very good job. So just turn off Visualize Spots now, and we'll just zoom in down to this little spot here. Yeah, so basically you would just change the size to match or just be slightly larger than the dust spot. You click over the dust spot, and then Lightroom creates an area that it's cloned from or healed from. So in this case, it's pick this area here, which is essentially the same sort of color and tone as the bit we've just healed. You can move this around once it's been selected. Move it over here. You can see how it starts to bring in some of the area underneath this bit here, but obviously in this case we want the sky because that's the same colour as the bit that we've just healed. Basically, you would just repeat this exercise until all the spots were removed. If you make a mistake, it's easy enough to undo a spot because you just either select it, press delete, and that removes the spot tool. You can also temporarily turn off spot removal to see what you've just done by clicking on this little switch here. You can also click on reset, which removes all of the spot removal tools you've just set, but obviously you'd only do that as a last resort. Generally, if you want to remove spots, just do it individually and remove them as necessary. The one advantage of Lightroom is that once you've placed all your spot removal spots down, go back to Library, right click on the image, go to Develop Settings, go to Copy Settings. In this case we'll uncheck everything initially, click on Spot Removal only, copy. Lightroom has now taken a note of where the spot removal has been placed in this image, and that means that we can then go to another image from the same session, go back to Develop Settings, Paste Settings. It will then copy the spot removal placement from the original image into this new image, saving a lot of time in cloning out in other images. That's the Lightroom tip for this video. Please do share, like and subscribe, and join me next time for another video where I'll cover another aspect of Lightroom to help you shape your images how you want them. See you then.